The U.S. President Joe Biden has wrapped up his tour of West Asia, but it was a trip that disappointed him since it was void of any major breakthroughs. For starters, Biden sought to use his first West Asia tour to reassert Washington's influence, but that fell flat. This edition of The Spotlight, we will look at what those disappointments were. We will also look at why Iran has stated that Washington, quote, has once again resorted to the failed policy of Iranophobia, trying to create tensions and crises in the region. First, let me introduce our guest for this edition of The Spotlight. John Busnish joins us. He's a journalist, activist, and political analyst from Belgrade. Also joining us is Firas Al-Najim, manager of Canadian Defenders for Human Rights, who joins us from Toronto. Welcome to you both. John Busnish, first over to you. Some of the headlines, not all of them, but quite a few, said that the U.S. President Joe Biden wanted to use this tour of West Asia in order to reassert, whatever that means, Washington's influence. However, he emerged without a single diplomatic breakthrough. Do you agree with that? Isn't that a bit harsh?
Well, I think it's actually a little bit soft. The sad fact of the matter is that not only did the advance teams, the negotiating teams, fail to negotiate some projects that could be approved during his visit, but they also made the President of the United States look even weaker and less effective than he actually is. So they've done a double whammy against their own position, and they've lost face in the region. And that is a serious loss of public recognition and public support for the parties that were depending to get the American carte blanche as they've had in the past.
Firas Al-Najim, we want to break down some of the things that happened during this trip, and one of them obviously was the issue of Israel and Saudi Arabia getting closer in terms of so-called normalization to come out. Basically, we're looking at the Saudi Aviation Authority first when it made an announcement, if you recall, that it's lifted the overflight restrictions on all carriers going into from Israeli planes to use Saudi airspace. And many in Israel, such as Yair Lapid, claimed it was the first official step for normalization with Saudi Arabia. That was, however, rejected flat out by Prince Faisal, who said that the move had nothing to do with Israel and was not in any way a step towards normalization. Wasn't that, in a sense, a slap in the face of Israel and in turn the U.S.?
Yes, I mean, it's very clear from the trip it was engineered to only visit two countries and two different regimes pretty much in the Middle East, and that is, first he went to Palestine, occupied Palestine, to meet with the Israeli officials. Then he went to Saudi Arabia to visit the Saudi officials there. And we see that at the same time that he did this visit, and then we see this announcing of opening the airlines and things like this, right? So this shows very clear that there is some agreements that are being binded, under the table, and now they're slowly coming out in the public. And why did he go to only Palestine, and why did he only go to Saudi Arabia? Why did he not go to, for instance, Turkey? Why did he go to Egypt? He didn't go nowhere except these two countries. And this is Biden's first trip, outside to the Middle East since he got presidency. So he disregarded, obviously, human rights and his promises of, he said that he would hold the Saudi regime accountable for killing Khashoggi and the MBS, MBS official. He said that MBS himself will be penalized for this issue, and we see that he gave him a fist pump, and he said that that if anything like this happens again in the future, so that means pretty much this file is closed up and is dealt with, and he let it go. That there's no accountability on this issue. So Khashoggi's murder and breaking international law, going inside of a consulate and doing all this was okay. They let it go because of interests and benefits. So really they stepped on human rights and they trampled over it in this trip. And at the same time, we've seen when he visited Palestine and he met with Israeli officials, right after he left, they started bombarding Gaza. So pretty much it was a green light given by Biden for the Israeli officials to start to bomb and hurt the Palestinian people.
Well, this is the part that's somewhat confusing, John Busnish, in terms of the oil factor. Because obviously lots of write-ups before this trip that the main reasons Biden is going to West Asia is to see what it can do in order to boost oil production, in particular from Saudi Arabia, if not as a whole from the GCC countries of the Persian Gulf. Now,
Well,
I'm guessing
you
the
know-
protocol. I'm guessing the protocol is that you don't set up something unless you know the answer in that diplomatic world. That he should have known that is not what's going to transpire, because you had Jake Sullivan who said that any action is going to be done within the context of OPEC plus. You even had Biden who said concrete results will not be seen for another couple of weeks. So did he set himself up for failure going there for oil production boost?
Well, I think we've once again we've got a double failure on the part of Biden by announcing results, anticipated results which he could not deliver, and on the support staff side from the White House and from the State Department, who did not finalize any deals before the president got on the plane to the destinations. This is a rudimentary first-grade diplomacy. I've worked in governments in Asia, in America, North America, and in Europe, and you never set a meeting without already having drafted the fundamental agreements that should be signed by your leaders at those meetings. The president doesn't do any negotiation. The president just comes, shows the flag, and signs the pre-negotiated deals. This really indicates that U.S. foreign policy is in disarray.
So you mean they didn't do that? So you mean they just
They
went
did not
there
do-
and they figured they're just going to talk about it?
They obviously did not do that. And the fact that the United States could not agree major decisions with its two closest allies, with Israel and Saudi Arabia, implies that Biden and his State Department simply don't have any pull. And I think that the general worldwide view of Biden is that Biden himself is already a lame duck president, and nobody knows what to expect from the United States.
Okay, talk about areas that is unknown to the U.S. president that should be part of the protocol, as our guest there talked about, Faris Al-Najim, is this Israeli Defense Pact. Now, there was a lot of write-ups on that there was going to be this integration of Israel with the regional countries to sign a defense pact or to hop on board a defense pact. But then you had, upon departure, not even upon departure, when Biden was in Saudi Arabia, the Saudi foreign minister in a press conference said there was no discussion on a defense alliance with Israel in the GCC summit of the Persian Gulf countries. So was that another failure then, and another, I guess, lack of reaching a consensus before Biden's trip on that issue?
I mean, you cannot believe everything they say, these officials, because they're good at manipulating, they're good at lying, they're good at fabricating. And the Saudi regime and their officials have all been raised and trained in U.S. facilities and U.S. universities and so on. And they've been working with the U.S. officials, and they've been training them to be good liars. So you can't really trust them. I'm pretty sure they had some agreements signed under the table, and they're working on certain agreements and so on to support Israel, to normalize with Israel. And even Netanyahu, not too long ago, was saying that if recently I heard him say that he said that the relations with Saudi Arabia are getting very strong, and that he promised that if he was elected into power, that he would pact an agreement and the normalization would start between Saudi Arabia and Israel. So really, there's a lot of things happening under the table that we start to see slowly after some time. And this trip was one of them. Right when they were in the trip, while he was Biden visiting these places, we seen that there was something that propped up all of a sudden, that there's an agreement between airlines. This is something really big, it's nothing small, because now they can transfer weapons to each other, they can visit each other. This is a very, very bad situation right now.
Something that's not obviously discussed much, at least that particular point that you talked about. All right, let's move on to something else here that the U.S. president said, John Busnich, And he said the U.S. is going to remain or will remain fully engaged in West Asia. Quoting him, "We will not walk away and leave a vacuum to be filled by China, Russia, or Iran." Why does the U.S. think that there's going to be a vacuum in the first place? And if there is one, why does it think it needs to fill it? Because if it needs to fill it, then you would look at their achievements. But what are their achievements?
Right. I mean, you've hit the nail right on the head here. First of all, the vacuum that Biden is referring to is the kind of vacuum that was left in Afghanistan when the United States suddenly pulled out without even removing its own military equipment to the tune of billions of dollars. So the United States has demonstrated by its own actions within this past year that they are leaving not only massive power vacuums in places that they've previously occupied, but they've also left donations of billions of dollars of weapons to the people that they call their enemies. So we know that they're not competent. And by reinforcing the worry about a vacuum being created, Biden has actually just focused more attention on the United States' failures. Secondly, when we talk about the United States being present and not allowing a vacuum to be filled by somebody else, what they're really talking about is militarily. Because the United States generally talks softly and carries a big stick. And so the United States is going to attempt to show by a deployment of forces, by bringing the fleets in the region, that they're engaged and that they're threatening military action to reinforce their positions on a number of issues. That alone is going to be a massive expenditure of US taxpayers' funds for a conflict which is 95% not likely to happen. So we've got a real mess at the top in the White House, and this is just another example of the problem.
Well, the Palestinian issue was something that really was a huge disappointment. I'm sure you'll agree for us on the Najim. And it's really, I'm not too sure what word to use when you see what the president did, the outcome, where from what I'm understanding here, no progress at all when it came to obviously any type of peace negotiations. There was no condemnation of any kind behind all the different violations of Israel, of which he focused instead on economic measures, which included 4G internet for Palestinians. Do you think 4G internet for Palestinians is the #1 issue of concern?
I mean, it's very clear even when he was bringing up the name of the well-known Palestinian, also American holding citizen, journalist Shireen Abu Akleh. He couldn't even spell her name right. You know, he couldn't even, pronounce it right. You know what I mean? He said it very, very incorrectly, and he was stuttering, because he knew this was a big crime and it's something that's important for the Palestinians. And many of the relatives of that journalist were sitting inside that room, and he was very weak, and you can see about her. He didn't. He wouldn't even want to visit Shireen Abu Akleh's family members and relatives. Later, he announced that they're welcome to come to the States, but they're thinking about it. They don't know if they want to go there because he disregarded them fully when he came to the land where she was killed. The West Bank, we've seen there's so much violations there, international laws being breached, evictions, and thefts of homes and the rebuilding of illegal settlements. He didn't speak anything about that. He just briefly said, "Oh, we care about dignity of the Palestinians and human rights and so on." He gave some pocket change to the Palestinian promise of $100 million or so on. Okay, and like you said, the 4G. I think the main concern is obviously human rights. I think the main concern is liberty, sovereignty, having a recognized, having embassies that are really recognized, where Palestinians are actually regarded as humans. Unfortunately, this man comes over there, does not even care about the Palestinians, as if they're not even humans. And then when he goes to the side of the Israelis and the occupiers, he treats them like gold, and he assures them so many things and gives them such big agreements, as if they need more agreements and they need more help and more assistance. Where they're the ones that are occupying, and they're the ones that are violating, and they're the ones that are killing, and they're the ones that are doing all kinds of crimes. And he showed clearly that he does not care about the Palestinians. And unfortunately, Mahmoud Abbas didn't hold him accountable and didn't, make a very strong stand against him. He should have actually refused to see him, because there is no real, there's no real him. What has he presented? Before he presents something, before he meets him, he should have presented to him a real plan on how the Palestinians are going to get some kind of statehood.
Sure. Well, follow me on this train of thought and see if you agree with me, John Bosnich. I'm looking how the U.S. has obviously is all out against Russia on all fronts when you take a look at the way that it's acting against Russia. And it, in turn, then has its eye out for China. We know that for a fact. Now, if China is Saudi Arabia's #1 customer, I know Russia has overtaken it recently, but in essence, Saudi Arabia sells the most oil to China. And taking a look at what Antony Blinken said last week at the G20, warning China not to support Russia and buy oil from Russia, doesn't Saudi Arabia then conclude, wait a minute, I'm going to be that China, where the U.S. is going to say, hey, don't sell your oil to China down the road? That's what the U.S. is going to do, because that's what it's doing right now when it comes to Russia and China. So why should Saudi Arabia even embrace the U.S. in any shape or form?
Well, the way you've posed your question makes it sound like Saudi Arabia has a choice. And in fact, the power structures in the Middle East basically do not leave a choice to Saudi Arabia except to do what the United States says, because without the United States military support, Saudi Arabia is a non-viable, non-defendable state. And this is the situation that the United States president came thinking could dictate anything he wanted, and even that he was unable to dictate properly what he wanted. I think we're seeing a real exposure of how weak and how disorganized the United States is under the current administration, and it's made even worse by a president who's accused of being senile, not only by his opponents, but by his allies.
Qatar made a strong statement for Al Saud regime. The prime addressing the summit was the Emir Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani. He went all out against Israel, blaming Israel for regional instability. He slammed the regime for illegal settlements. Let's see, what else did he do? And of course, the blockade on the Gaza Strip. Now, it's interesting that he would do that, given the fact that there's a U.S. military base in Qatar. What do you think about the statements made there by the Emir?
I mean, I think they're good statements, and that's I mean, different tone than the Saudis and the Bahrainis and the Emiratis and all these other GCC countries, or the ones that are silent, such as Oman. You know, it's something that we can build on. Hopefully, that really they can get some sovereignty. As you said, they have a big U.S. base there, so it's kind of surprising how he can speak in this kind of manner. But like I said, like, you know, whoever speaks against the Israeli occupation, against the violations, against the crimes that are happening, you know, the major blockade on the people of Gaza, especially after they bombarded them right after Biden visited them, that shows a very clear sign that Biden gave them a green light to bomb Gaza. So, I mean, that's a good sign. It's another regional country that hopefully, you know, Iran and the axis of resistance can ally with and work with on certain fronts, especially for the Palestinian cause. And we hope more countries can awaken their governments, and the governments can awaken and be able to really stand up for the Palestinian people and for the dignity of Palestinians, because you know, injustice anywhere is injustice everywhere. You know, and they're part of the region, and the Palestinians deserve human rights. You know, they've been trampled on for many years now, 74 years. And it's continuous, and it's growing, actually. The situation is getting worse and worse. And whenever we see a new Israeli official, you see more crimes, more aggressions, more manipulation, more lies, and a harder life for the Palestinians. You know, we can see very clear, even the Palestinians, how did they welcome the Israelis? They put signs up saying that this is apartheid, and that we want justice for Shireen Abu Akleh. So It shows very clear that the Palestinians were rejecting the trip and weren't happy with Biden coming there.
I saved the best for last, and it has to deal with Iran there, John Bosnich. Obviously, we saw how Biden was embraced by Israel. We saw the doubling down of military support practically, not only for the Iron Dome, but this new laser machine of some kind, as if the Iron Dome was working so well that they now moved on to another equipment. Maybe that is supposed to make up the deficiency of the Iron Dome. Anyways, interestingly, Lapid said, got to use force against Iran. Diplomacy is not going to work. Talks are inadequate. of which, after all the talk that Israel gave, at the end Biden said, well, we're still going to go for the diplomatic route. Even though he did say, if that doesn't work, then force will be used as a last resort. That has been taken as a disappointment by Israel and its officials, because they say that that's not what they had hoped for. How do you see the outcome of that?
Well, there are two sides to that coin. We're going for the diplomatic fig leaf to of the American policy. They will take a violent response. And every action that is coordinated between Israel and America should be taken in light of a very important fact. There was a book produced by Dr. John Mearsheimer at the University of Chicago called The Israel Lobby. And in that book, he pointed out that 60% of the donations to the Democratic Party and 40% of the donations to the Republican Party come from the Israel Lobby. So it wasn't Biden going to give orders to Israel. It was Biden going to Israel to take orders. That's what happened.
So is he going to get the 60%?
They always get their money. And in return for the money for their electoral campaigns, they have to do what the Israel Lobby tells them to do. People should read that book, The Israel Lobby, Dr. John Mearsheimer. It is an eye-opener about international politics involving Israel and the United States.
Very well. We're going to leave it there. Thank you very much. That's John Busness, journalist, activist, and political analyst from Belgrade. First, Al-Najim, thank you so much, from Toronto, manager of the Canadian Defenders for Human Rights.
Thank you.
And with that, we come to an end for this edition of The Spotlight. For Mika Vatakwaye and the team, it's goodbye until next time.